Good morning,
Who's
sir.
got the mic?
The mic is at the back there.
No.
Good morning, sir.
Oh, wow. How old are you, man?
I'm in 10th class.
In 10th grade. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I'm a fan of yours, truly.
Okay.
So,
Thank
I'm
you.
Gunjan Pandey from SPS Bhopal. And I wanted to ask you that in your third book, how did you come up with the idea of representing the Devi Astra with somewhat
Whoa.
the atomic bomb?
What? How many of you haven't read the third book out here?
Yeah, no plot spoilers, please.
Yeah, shame on you guys. There are books available in the store out there.
Yes.
Go buy them and stand in the
Amish will be
corner and write
signing
100
after
times.
that.
I will buy the Vahiputra book and read it. Okay, no. Okay. Sorry, I can't. I'll have to be a little careful in how I answer it because it might spoil it for those who haven't read the book. But all I want to say is, if you look in our past, even in the Mahabharata, for example, there is a description of a weapon called the Brahmastra. And if you read the descriptions of the effects of the Brahmas, it sounds eerily like a nuclear bomb. I have a theory. We believe that that the modern age, we're the apogee of human civilization, we're the highest there's ever been. And I have a theory that how about if we believe that maybe our ancients weren't such idiots after all, maybe they were smart as well. Not just in India, I'm saying across the world. Ancient Greeks, ancient Egyptians, ancient Chinese, ancient Indians. How about if we approach it from a perspective that maybe they were smart as well? And maybe they didn't develop the technologies that we did, but maybe they developed some other technologies. If we approach it from that perspective and try and read the documents that they've left behind for us, maybe our interpretations would be different. Many times these interpretations are just dismissed because we just assume, oh, they lived 4,000 years ago, what the hell would they know? So that's the approach that I have in my book. Let's approach our ancestors with a little bit of respect.
Agreed, because here we are 4,000 years later, and what the hell do we know?
Hello, Mr. Amish.
Hi.
This is Sastri from Jaipur.
Hi, sir.
I had a chance to go through many of the religions and interacting with the people. The thing I gather is that Hinduism is not a religion. It is a philosophy, because religion means that there will be followers. Philosophy means it is integration of ideas. How do you react to this statement?
Interesting. I have a theory in my book which I've spoken of, that there are two groups of most ways of life, most philosophies can be classified into two groups, the masculine and the feminine. It has nothing to do with men and women, it's about a different way of life. The masculine way of life is a life of laws, a life of order, where the followers are compliant. They follow the laws that have been set up either by God or by great leaders in the past. And there's the feminine way of life, which is a life of probability, where even if there are laws, they are adjustable. It's a life driven by passion, by freedom. And most ways of life can be classified into one of these two. And it's equally so with religions as well. I think Hinduism, the way it exists today, is a life of passion and freedom actually. It's a feminine way of life. Like I said, it has nothing to do with men and women, it's about a way of life. But Lord Ram's way within Hinduism is a masculine way of life. Islam is a masculine way of life. The Western world, the way it exists today, is actually a feminine way of life. And if you approach religions from this perspective, you might find a bit of a mind shift, because I would, since you're interested in religions, I would strongly advise read into the philosophies of the ancient Egyptian religion, which was called chemism, and the ancient Greek religions. They are also actually a more a feminine way of life. If you read the myths of Mahat, for example, they are deeply philosophical, but they leave interpretations to you. A feminine way of life essentially leaves interpretations to the followers. You figure out your own way. The philosophy just kind of sets out guidelines and thought starters for you. Whereas the masculine way of life tells you laws, and you follow them for a better way of life. Neither way of life is better or worse. They're just two different ways of life. It's up to you which path you want to follow. Thank you. Okay. टेक्निकल रुकावट के लिए खेद है.
Hi Amish,
Hi.
my name is Monica.
Hi,
I'm so
Monica.
happy to see you.
thank
I'm
you.
from also from Mumbai.
Oh, okay.
And my question is, you said ki third point, you should market it well. I wanted to know how did you market your book from the starting point?
You know, my first book was rejected by every publisher it was sent to. So it was actually quasi self-published. My agent is Anuj here. Anuj?
He's there. I can
Where?
see him. Yeah.
Yeah, now that's a magic
Give-
man out there,
give
Anuj
Anuj
Bari.
Bari a big hand
Yeah.
because
You should give him a big hand. The only one outside my family, who supported me when no one else was supporting me was Anuj Bari right there. And we actually launched the book ourselves. Anuj invested in the printing, I invested in the marketing. And actually that ended up being a blessing in disguise because there were no publishers telling us that, oh, this is the way it has always been done in publishing, so we should do it this way. That's the most irritating line in the world, that don't try something new because it has never been tried before. I mean, like, if it's new, obviously it's not been tried before. So we didn't have anyone telling us that, which gave us the freedom to try a lot of different things. So some of the things that we did was, this idea was from my wife, Preeti, actually, that she said, why don't we distribute the first chapter of the book free of cost? From what I'd been told, apparently this had never been tried before. What we did was we printed the first chapter with the same cover as the book. And I went and made PowerPoint presentations to various chain stores. They told me they'd never seen an author, this was in early 2010 I think. They said they'd never seen an author come with a PowerPoint presentation, so they just agreed to what I suggested. And I told them that can you just distribute these copies free of cost, okay, the first chapter. And what they did was they displayed because they thought it's free, so they displayed it at the cash counter. Now think about the impact of this, okay. If you're a debut author, your first book is usually a well-kept secret in the store. Forget about the readers, even the store staff won't know your book has been launched. And here I was, a debut author, and in effect, my first chapter was being displayed at a prime display space, the cash counter. When the customer is waiting for his bill, he sees something out there, free is stamped on it. So many of them just picked it up, went home, read the first chapter and came back and said, okay, where's the book? So this works really well for us. And the main thing is you got to try a new idea. Today, if you go to a bookstore and say, I want to distribute my first chapter free of cost, they'll charge you display space, right? At that time, this idea had never been tried before, so they just gave it to me free of cost as well. So you need to try different ideas. That's the main point. The second thing that we did was we made a trailer film. This was an idea from a friend of mine. From what I'd been told, apparently it had never been tried before, a trailer film for a book. And we made a proper live action trailer film, not animation. We shot a model against Chroma. We had music made by Tawfiq Qureshi ji, and we uploaded the trailer on YouTube, and it ended up gathering, I think, 100,000 views in a few weeks, and that really pushed the sale of the book quite a lot. Key thing is to try different things. It's not about the money, it's about the ideas. Hi.
Good afternoon, Mr. Tripathi. I'm Abhilasha from Delhi.
Hi, Vilasha.
Hi. I'd just like to ask one thing. In your books, the matrimonial alliances in the book that are made are based out of love, compassion, and friendship for each other, and they face so many hardships in the form of different tribes, different social standings, and even a long-lasting oath of celibacy. And they still go past all of that and marry each other. And yet, in today's society, even today, marriages based on love and companionship are looked down upon if they're not from the same tribe, not from the same caste, not from the same religion, not from the same country. And often they're even punished for even thinking in such a way. What are your views on this? Do you think it's because of religious and traditional beliefs that this is wrong? Or do you think that our religion propagates love and companionship in any way?
It's a very good question, and it's tied into another big issue, which is the status of women. Control over marriage, whom you marry, whom you fall in love with, is in a way control over women, where women are seen as symbols of honor rather than their own person, rather than individual characters, individual people in their own right. Is this what is there in our ancient traditions? Hell no. Okay, hell no. What is there today is a corruption. In the ancient way, for example, today we are told that women aren't supposed to read the scriptures or do religious ceremonies, which is absolute nonsense. The longest, and many say one of the greatest Upanishads, is the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Okay, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad is a conversation between Maharishi Yajnavalkya, who was a man, and Maharishika Maitreyi, who was a woman. Okay, so the greatest Upanishad is actually a conversation between a man and a woman, and she was a Maharishika, not just any other woman. Okay, we are told that women aren't supposed to marry where they choose to. Go back in the Puranas and our early texts, you'll find many cases of this. They'll find that we are told that women aren't supposed to talk back to their husbands when those husbands do something wrong, which is equal nonsense. For example, Abhigyana Shakuntalam, which is one of Kalidasa's greatest plays. It's the story of Shakuntala and Dushyant. In Kalidasa's play, by which time societal mores have started changing a little bit, Shakuntala doesn't criticize Dushyant as aggressively in Kalidasa's play. Okay? But if you read the Mahabharata, which was written earlier, boss, there's no politeness around how Shakuntala talks. She rips Dushyant to shreds, okay, for what she's done. Right? The way women are treated today, the way love is approached today, is a corruption of our ancient way of life. And even the mixture between castes, that apparently is not allowed, this is also a corruption of our ancient way of life. And don't just go by the text, go by the Genome Project. I'm sure you're aware there's a massive project done amongst to study various different genetic groups, okay, and see relations between them. And it covered the entire world, covered India as well. And the Genome Project, look, it's not like history, which is frankly not a science really. It's the Genome Project is science. It's right and wrong. There are no interpretations about it. The Genome Project has brought out very clearly that in India, different groups were mixing with each other very freely, which means mixing with each other means what? Which means that the child was born out of a mother and a father who were from different groups. This process started declining somewhere between the 1st century BC and the 1st century AD. Now God knows what happened in that period. That needs to be researched. Okay, somewhere between that phase, this process declined. After that, the mixture of genes between different groups really collapsed. Groups became much more endogamous, okay, that they would marry only within each other, which means so-called caste groups. Actually, the term caste itself is wrong. Varna was a class system, not a caste system, but anyway, that's a separate thing. But so-called caste groups stopped intermarrying, okay. So actually in the traditional way, intermarriages was the natural way of life, okay. So what we have today of the oppression of women, of stopping intermarriage between different castes, between different groups, between different religions, is a corruption of our ancient way of life. It's not our traditional way. So I always tell all of you guys, you want to marry the person you love, go ahead and do it. You're not being less Indian, you're being more Indian.
I think there's a question here.
Good morning, Amish.
Where?
Here.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Saksham. It's amazing to be standing here in front of you.
Hi Saksham, thank you.
I wanted to ask you two things. First of all, your novel is a lot to do with the philosophy of evil. Do you think it is possible that evil can be dispensed with permanently, or do you think it will keep arising again and again and perhaps teach us new things? Second, I wanted to ask, do you believe that the philosophy of karma is actually a scientific phenomenon that has only not been proven yet?
Yeah, good question. How old are you, man? Good philosophical questions. Good philosophical questions. Okay. Evil. Look, we are told that God is against evil, right? So why the hell does evil not get destroyed if God has destroyed it? Right? Why does it keep rising again and again? And the only thought I want to leave with you is that evil also rises because it serves a purpose. If I say anything more, I might spoil for those who haven't read the third book. Shame on you guys.
You're all going to be reading this after the event.
But what I would suggest, if you're interested in philosophies, read some of our Upanishads. Also read, especially some of the ancient Egyptian philosophies, where it was described that God is actually in balance. When you understand that concept, you understand the interplay of good and evil very easily. It kind of fits into place. Okay.
That's such a good question.
But a damn good question. I wish I could answer you in more detail. But there are some people who haven't read the third book. But essentially understand that point, that God is in balance. Okay. God doesn't pick sides. The ekam, in the Vedas, the one God, the Nirgun Nirakar, formless God, is described as ekam, the one. He doesn't pick sides. He can never pick sides. How can he pick sides? Everyone is his. And he is in balance, which is why he is shunya and infinity at the same time. Okay? That's why he is nothing and everything at the same time. That's not just wordplay. It's a deep philosophical thought. When you start understanding that God is in balance. And then you'll also understand why God many times was described as a circle, because it doesn't have a beginning, doesn't have an end. It's the perfect geometric figure. It's shunya and infinite at the same time. Possibly that's all I can tell you. But read up a bit more on the Upanishads. Trust me, you'll love it. What is the second question on karma? Yeah, karma.
Can you please give
the funda is, can one prove it? No. Does it help explain many things that happen? There are questions which trouble all of us. Why, and especially a question like, why do bad things happen to good people? And conversely, why do good? And how do you make sense of this? Why do you get a blessing which you think you don't really deserve? As I have got, with my books. How do you explain this? Now, one can have various theories which explain the facts as you see it today. Now, in a way, what you see in science is also the same. The standard model to describe the universe, that there was a Big Bang, blah, 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 the entire, the models that's described to us. It's a theory which explains the facts as we see it today. Okay? Like, if you look deep into space, the color that dominates, besides black of course, is red. Okay. Now there is a theory that we are told of why we see red. It's a concept called redshift. When light travels, the universe is expanding. So when it expands, the light wave also expands with it. When the light wave expands, what happens? The wavelength goes up and the frequency comes down, right? Yeah. Now 7th standard, science class is, if the wavelength goes up and the frequency comes down, it shifts more towards red, right? You know the Vibgyor color spectrum, right? Red has a higher wavelength. So therefore, as light stretches, it actually appears more and more red. There's a concept called redshift. Now this is a theory to explain what we see today. Could a better theory come up 20 years later? Yeah, possible. Correct? So science is, in a way, especially physics, especially theoretical physics, essentially builds theories to explain facts as we see it today. Now you can approach karma from the same perspective. It's a theory which explains facts as we see it today. Does it actually make sense with the facts that you see it? I think it does. Correct? Are there better theories available? I haven't seen any. But maybe a better theory could come up. But until that, this theory makes sense to me. I don't know if that answer makes sense to you. Like, we believe in Big Bang as well because it's a theory which explains facts as we see it today. Right? Okay.
Yeah.
Whoever has the mic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm right here.
Dude,
okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Big fan. I actually had a question
I
about.
hope you're standing on something stable.
Yeah. So okay. It's okay.
And
It's
what's
okay.
your name?
My name is Chinmay. I'm from Delhi. Yeah, I actually have a question. Out of all the twists you could have chosen, you chose to make Shiva human. Shivaji. Yeah. Why did you choose that? What was your train of thought when you were choosing that?
You know, there are various concepts of God, of the philosophy of God in the traditional Indian way. There is the Nirgun Nirakar concept, where God is formless. Like I said, you know, the Ekam, or in ancient times it was called Brahman, also not the caste Brahman, but Brahman. It's a different concept. It's kind of similar. It's like a force that exists across the universe. Okay, and this one formless God, he never took sides. His existence allowed our existence. Okay, that was the concept. There's a second concept of an Akar concept of God, where God takes an anthropomorphical form, a human form, so that he can come closer to us, like Lord Shiva, Lord Vishnu, Lord Brahma, Shakti Ma. There's a third concept of God called the Avatar concept of God, where God is born as a human being, completes his karma, dies and goes back up. Okay, like Lord Krishna, Lord Ram. And there is a fourth concept of God, where a man becomes a God. Okay, where there is this belief that God exists in every single one of us, and all we have to do is discover that God within. This concept also exists. Now, I find this concept very inspiring. Like I said, I'm essentially a rebel by nature. You know, so for me, a concept that God lives within us, and all we have to do is discover Him, is much more inspiring than this belief that, oh, we are these, kira makodas, and someone up there is going to help us. And I found this concept inspiring, and maybe that's how it emerged in the book. Hi.
Hello, sir. I'm Christy.
Amish. Okay.
I'm Christy from Sagar School.
Hi, Christy.
And sir, I loved your books, the way how you transformed Lord Shiva into immortal. Sir, in your book, there's an idea that no one is wrong. It's just that people have different perspectives. So, sir, according to that, there will be no rights and wrong in this world. So, what is your opinion about it?
My God, all the philosophical questions come from the kids, man. Smart guys. India's future is good. Okay. Okay, this right and wrong has, one can debate it till the cows come home. Okay. I was in England recently. I'd gone for a festival out there, and I spoke. Yeah, Neil, what happened? Okay. I spoke to the British out there on Winston Churchill, and one can completely understand that for the British, Winston Churchill is a hero, right? Because he fought for them. He when they were being attacked by the Nazis, so they see him as one of the greatest men of the 20th century, because they see him as someone who defended freedom, okay, as a way of life. Okay. Are they right from their own perspective? Yes, perhaps. You can understand a British guy thinking that way. What would the perspective of us Indians be? Except for a tiny, group in India which is more loyal to England than India, vast majority of us think of Winston Churchill as, frankly, a monster. Correct? Because he was racist. He was deeply racist. He personally drove a scorched earth policy when the Japanese were attacking India from the east, which led to the death of 2 million of our fellow Indians in the Great Bengal famine in the early 40s. Right? The French don't like Winston Churchill much as well. There was a port in Algeria which the Germans were about to capture, and that meant that they would have taken over a large part of the French Navy, which would have helped their war effort. And there were French soldiers in there. Winston Churchill did the logical thing. He bombed that place himself, killed many French people, but destroyed those ships. So the Germans couldn't lay their hands on it. So the French don't much like Winston Churchill either. So we don't like him. The French don't think of him as a monster, but they don't like him. Most Indians think of him as a monster. Correct? Now who's right? Are we right, or are the British right? Or do they have a right to their opinion? Because for them he was a hero. And we have a right to our opinion, because for us, frankly, he was a monster. Now, what's right and wrong? Right? It depends on your perspective. Now, there are some things which are clearly wrong, which you should not be doing. Okay? You can set your moral compass on that. Because remember, the theory of karma is you will carry the sins that you do. And you will carry the good that you do as well. Right? But many times in judgment of right and wrong, it can depend on your perspective.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I've just been told that we
Okay.
don't have any more time for questions.
All right. Bye-bye.
But Amish will be signing books after the event. So for those of you who haven't yet bought his new book, you can go to the festival bookshop and continue the conversation with him. But please keep it short because I'm sure lots of people will want to come and talk to you while you're signing the book. And I think there's some housekeeping questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Amish. This was really a wonderful session, and it was wonderful to see the young readers having their books in their hand and asking questions, intelligent questions. Thank you, Amish.